good. All right. We're going to move into the next part of our meeting, which is item number 3 on the agenda for the folks that have a copy of the agenda. Approval of minutes of previous meetings.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I move to approve the meeting minutes of the meeting of November 6th, 2019, and the meeting minutes of the meeting of January 8th, 2020.
Second.
All those are in agreement?
Aye.
Passes. All right, next up on the agenda is Peacedale Elementary School Parking Lot Improvement Project Update. Who would like to speak to that, and would you need a microphone?
I don't think so. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry?
No, that's fine. It'll be pretty quick. So just following up, we have all the drawings and specs ready to go out to bid. We're just working on some of the bid dates, and that should be going out shortly. And we have all approvals from the state and RIDE in hand, so we're ready to get that out. So it can be awarded and construction can start right after school lets out. There was a meeting that I went to at Peacedale last week. There were a couple comments from members of Peacedale, so we're incorporating those into the plans, so there won't have to be any addenda issued, and that'll go out with the plans that get bid shortly.
Oh, if I can, so I had asked Tracy to attend. I was attending a faculty meeting, and then I was also attending a PTO meeting as part of my meet and greet in the district. And Peacedale was my last building, and so knowing that they would have parking lot questions, I asked if Tracy could come and share the plans to start the conversation around the flow of the buses, and then the faculty, there weren't too many questions, but maybe like 1 or 2 kind of big ones, but then there were some questions more around landscaping with the parents.
Okay, great. Any other updates regarding Peacedale Elementary School parking lot?
Just one, Mr. Chairman. There was a meeting last week with Marianne Crawford, the superintendent, myself, Zach, and Amy Reiner. We met with a representative from the Bentley Downs Joint Enterprise and are working through budget on the OPM services for the parking lot portion. It's a tight budget, and there are some issues that we've got to work through. But the meeting went well, and we're looking forward to resolving those issues soon.
I'd like for someone to make a motion to add an agenda item to the agenda that's missing, correspondence.
I'd make a motion that we add for discussion purposes an item to the agenda allowing the introduction of correspondence to or of interest to the school building committee.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, great. We're going to discuss that now. Madam Secretary, you mentioned that you had some correspondence.
Okay, we received from Mr. Doral Beasley an email, subject title Revised Facilities Project Estimate. I'll file that. And then we also did receive an email from Mr. Beasley regarding the emails, and where is he? Right here. I apologize, I thought you knew to send them to me, so, and then you got spammed, so you're good now, yeah, okay. And then we did receive one more piece of correspondence, no, that's not true, 2 more. Where's the one from Sean? We also received an email from, here it is, from Sean Kruger. It's titled Support for Fall 2020 Referendum, and we'll file that as well. And the last one is we received a memorandum from Ursula Tights and Richt LTD, the counselors at law for the town, and it's in regards to the Maori land and the possible sale of the high school. I don't know, do you want me to read this or wait and discuss it when we get to the stage 2?
We can discuss it when we get to stage 2. We can start with that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
we did not receive the email from Mr. Beasley. That was not,
Was that the email that I saw come through later today?
Yeah, we, just yesterday, I think, the Mr. Beasley ones came through.
not to us down here.
No, I don't
anyway.
think I
Okay.
forwarded them to anybody.
Okay, so
Yeah.
any acceptance of correspondence, I would move to the next meeting because we
Okay.
haven't had a chance to see what's there.
That sounds fair. All right. Before I forget, we do have a visitor in the audience. Miss Christine Lopes-Metcalf from RIDE is here as well to observe and possibly answer some questions that we may have. Thank you.
Thank you for being here,
Thank you.
and welcome.
All right. Next up, we have the OPM project manager updates. Tom, would you like to speak? And if so, we're going to need a microphone. It's being recorded.
Let's get big microphone right there.
You could.
Oh, we'll go back to it.
Hi, I'm Tom Leska from Bentley Downs, bonus project manager for the security upgrade projects and all the projects in this district. We are basically 100% complete. We finished some change order work this week, the millwork in Matunic as well as West Kingston. It came out beautiful. A couple little touch-up things that we're going to do. But I want to thank all the community, all the schools, principals, for the great teamwork that we had. RGB, Bentley Downs, Martone, and I did want to give a shout out to Martone, and I sent Bryant a little list of all the extras he could have billed us for, and it was a whole page of them, accounted for about $10,000. So when you see Mike around town, thank him. He was gracious with that, painting, some additional electrical, did above and beyond what a lot of contractors would do. So he worked with us well, worked with Tracy well. I just want to thank everybody for the great job, and hopefully everybody's secure. That's number one,
Yeah.
the safety of the.
Tom, I just have one quick question. I was at the high school last week. Is there new signage at the entrance at the office, or going to be new signage, just so people know? I think people sometimes are confused. I was there and I watched folks
Coming in.
hit the button but try to open the wrong door. I guess the right one opens and not the left one.
It's the other way around.
Sorry.
the other
Left
way.
door opens.
Sorry.
Yeah. Chip, do you want a sign put up there that would help?
It was something that I think they would like to have.
Yes.
Do I have to ask Martone for another freebie?
I mean, I think
said
it could
to
be
her
as simple as
yesterday, "How many times
a sign that's on the door that's see-through that just lets people know how to access the building. 'Cause
Yeah, and I
it's
talked to-
opposite of what you think.
And I spoke to Wayne, I'd like to walk him through all the facilities, make sure another set of eyes is looking at it and have his stamp of approval on everything, so. But thank you, everybody. Great
So,
job.
Mr. Chairman, I have two questions. The first question is, if it's really a sign that it can just be posted on the inside, do we really need to reach back out?
No,
and-
we just need one of those kind of laminated that sticks to the inside of the window so that folks, as they walk up to the door, know which door to pull.
All right.
There's one currently in, I think Matunic has that situation where they have one right against.
We're talking like $20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a printed sign that communicates how to enter.
So
the
long as
building.
it's not a change order, I don't mind, but. And my other question, my real question is, do we know what the change orders for the millwork ended up costing?
16,000 roughly.
Yeah.
We went through 3 different vendors, and it was 21,000, 20,000, and it ended up to be 16,000, and we could push I'm sorry? Both schools, yes. And having relationship with that particular millwork contractor, I pushed them to get it done, and it was installed Monday, so.
speak to that.
Yep.
I was at Matunic this morning, and it looks adorable.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I noticed it as soon as I walked in. I had been at West Kingston the other day, and they didn't have theirs, so it was just the table, and just the difference. It looks really, really good.
Yeah,
It's-
yeah.
And they love it. It looks
Yeah.
just really good.
And there was a couple of little things that, when I was there with Dennis, I asked him to get some paint and kind of match some of the voids in the walls, and there's some molding and stuff like that, which he's going to take care of.
Tom, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to apologize. My email system wasn't working until I went to the town hall today to have it fixed. So I didn't see a lot of the emails until 4 o'clock today. But I did print out the email that you mentioned regarding Mike Martone. I wanted to quickly thank him as well. But some of the items that I'm looking here in terms of painting, there was some additional work that he did painting at the high school, Matunic, West Kingston, Peacedale, interior and exterior. Demolition and disposal at Matunic and West Kingston. Flooring issues at Matunic, West Kingston, and the high school. Drywall repair, additional damaged walls at Peacedale, the high school, and West Kingston. Electrical work at Matunic, Peacedale, and Curtis Corner. Insulation added to additional wall ceiling insulation at Peacedale, Curtis Corner, Matunic, and West Kingston. And ceiling tiles, replaced damaged ceiling tiles that not in scope of work at all of the schools, Peacedale, Matunic, High School, West Kingston, and Wakefield. And railings, purchased and installed new AZEC railing at Peacedale front entrance in approximate value of $10,000. So we appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just point out that this really is unusual. Most contractors would not let those items go without a change order and would insist on payment. We got lucky. We had a number of items that could have been charged against the project that were not charged against the project. We ended up with the one change order that was significant. It could have been substantially more than it was.
Peregrine Group, do you have any updates now, or you want to wait? Okay. We're going to, I accidentally skipped item number 5, which is very important. Stage 2, necessity of construction application update. And who would like to take that? Yeah. Yeah, you want to go to the microphone? That'll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sam Bradner with the Peregrine Group. So I think at this point, we've spent the last 2 public sessions, both at last week's school committee meeting and the previous building committee meeting week before that, presenting out the conceptual master plan for the Curtis Corner Road site. We've had an opportunity to sit with the building committee and review that in a little bit of detail at the previous meeting. I think it was a more high-level discussion at last week's school committee meeting, and I think there's a vote penciled in for next week for that school committee meeting as well. I think at this point, RGB has kind of concluded their scope of this high-level analysis that you guys engaged them to do, and for us to work with them. So I think at this point, we're looking for direction from this body to either formally put this into a new stage 2 process, which again, remember, what we did was super high level, very fast to try to understand the feasibility of it. In Tracy's words, it was kind of a test fit to see whether the site could accommodate the program and whether we thought it was rational to think that you could do renovations and additions at this location. I think the answer was yes, based on the plan that we came out with. A lot of work ahead of us. So I think the next step is, if we were going to be successful in hitting, whether it's a summer, sometime this summer resubmittal 2 ride, that the next step would be to rescope and formally enter it into that process, and then also see what the impacts will be on the other pieces of the project, the Broad Rock and the elementary school scopes. But I think we're looking for feedback from this group as well as the school committee next week to kind of take that next step.
Mr. Chairman, Sam, there's been a question that I've heard a couple of times over the course of the last week regarding the cost estimates that RGB presented last week at the school committee. The question was whether Peregrine had conducted an independent cost estimate, or whether there was a collaborative effort to come to the cost estimates.
So I would say it was collaborative. We did engage our cost estimator to try to look at the plans as they were presented. And let's remember, 2 pages, right? 1 floor plan and 1 site plan. So we knew that we were never going to be getting the same level of information, say we were against the elementary school plans.
Right.
So what we were trying to do is look at our cost estimator's information as well as our collective kind of experience in the marketplace to try to peg what we thought each of those, I'll call the 3 projects, were going to land at. We know we have a lot of work to realize to fit into what those tranches were that we presented last week.
So I'll ask, RGB to explain how they did their cost estimate, to the extent that what you guys were doing was looking over their shoulder. Is that a fair characterization?
I mean, we had our estimator do it. They did not do a separate estimate on their part. But what we tried to do was review what our estimator did and then get together and kind of walk through the logic behind it. Because again, the question is, was this included, was that included? We're way too early in the process to say yes or no to any of those questions. What we're trying to do is look very macro level to say, do we think we can achieve a new addition component and a renovation component of the site, given square footages and assumptions around kind of levels of finish? And what we know we're going to have to do is kind of find that balance between the new per square foot cost, and then what does that realize from a renovation standpoint?
So can you describe the collaborative effort? How
Sure.
did you guys work together? I'm
Yep.
trying to understand how distinct the estimates are.
Well, there aren't estimates, there's one. So there's one budget that we had our estimator put together, again, on a per square foot basis. Basically, we had the 2-page plan.
So Peregrine's estimator was the principal estimator.
Yeah, and I would say, estimate is a strong term. You're not usually doing an estimate at this stage of a process. You're assigning order of magnitude per square foot cost based on relative data in the marketplace. So new construction costs for schools or projects of this similar type and scale, and then renovation of those. The challenge that you have is with renovation, no 2 renovation projects are the same. So you're kind of picking what you think is a market number that we think is rational, and then applying all the other markups and the other contingencies and allowances on top of that.
So I'm really just trying to understand how this was done. And I will get into, I have some concerns or some questions at least about the estimates. I understand they're very high level, but before we even get there, I just want to make sure I understand who did the work, who's responsible for the estimate, who owns it.
Yeah, I would not call it an estimate, though. I want to be very careful that there's a vast difference between.
What would you call it?
I would call it an order of magnitude budget for this very early stage in the process. If you think about where you were 12 months ago, or 18 months ago when you started the original stage 2, you wouldn't even had any pricing until the end of stage 2, right? So we're doing this really early look to try to see, do we think that we can fit this into the kind of the bucket of funds that we believe is available, or that the town believes that they can go out and finance.
So who owns the order of magnitude budget? Who built it?
Peregrine did.
Okay. Thank you.
Dave, you want to add comments?
Speaking of the,
Can I tell you how we backed into it?
yeah, if you don't mind.
You've asked 5
But
questions
this
on the
gets to
same
my
thing,
point.
so-
Did you back into it, or did Peregrine
We
back into
both,
it?
you work
It
collaboratively.
was collaborative.
Yeah,
All right.
you,
Not uncommon.
through our estimates of the other construction, we understand that it's $400 a square foot roughly for new construction. So you back that into a number of the square footage you're adding, 80 or 90,000 times the 400, that gives you X. And then you're left with Y, whatever that left is what you use for your renovation budget. So this existing school is about 100,000 square feet. You divide that by Y, and that gives you about $125 a square foot. Now, some of the additions that we had out there in 1990s would require less than $125 to bring it up, where others back here would require more. But just for budget analysis, a new roof is about $25 a square foot. Mechanical systems are $35 a square foot. Electrical system upgrade would be $15 a square foot. So that kind of gives you an idea. You're buying into it almost like the price is right? You buy into that 125 of what you can buy out of that thing. So we plan on doing the same thing in a regular construction process. This building is an occupied building, so it isn't a building that's shelled or turned off. So it's an occupied, code-compliant building, you work back into it. So spaces like this, you want to renovate spaces like this where other spaces may get a coat of paint.
Right.
Okay? Same thing as the high school. We do
So,
the same thing.
is this the appropriate time for this?
I think it is.
Okay. So can you walk us through the order of magnitude budget at this point? What is the order of magnitude budget we're looking at?
So we know that the town was able to spend about $85 million, so the paper said. So we knew $80 to $85 million rather was our overall budget.
Right.
We looked at the elementary school bucket, the middle school bucket, and then the high school bucket. So we did that cost factor of the high school being, can this plan work? We devised a plan that would work, and then we used new construction at 400 and existing modeled back at 125 renovation cost. And then we limited Broad Rock down to, I believe, 17 million, and that left about 8 million, 6 million. As you can tell, it's changed, but about 6 million for the elementary schools. So we have those 3 bucket of funds, and now what we would do is go back and refine those buckets into which you can get for $6 million. So the bulk of your elementary schools are already received security entrance modifications. So now we're looking at 21st century spaces in each one of those elementary schools and some kind of upgrades. The money that you would need maybe to finish all that construction, according not only to the Jacobs report, but our findings, would exceed that, but you do that through capital expenditures in the future.
So you've talked about the difference between the cost of new construction and the cost of renovation and the ability to shift funds where maybe a coat of paint becomes necessary as opposed to a full reno of a hallway or something. What's the breakout for the high school $62 million component of the budget for the new versus renovation of this building?
So new would be based on $400 a square foot.
No, I mean, the $62 million must have a breakdown between the new, what would be spent on the new and what would be spent on renovation. What's our reserve, I suppose? What's the buffer that we've got in the old building?
Tracy, was that 28 million? It was 80,000 or 90,000 times 4, so that's 36 million. 36 million would be new construction.
36 million
You
new
had soft
construction.
cost of 11 million, and then the remainder of that would be spent on renovations.
So 32 plus 11 is 43. I'm sorry. 47? So 47 with a balance of, what is that? Anybody quick on that?
15?
15, and that would also have soft costs?
No, the 11 is
that's a
total
straight.
soft cost deducted at the end.
Okay. So we're anticipating $15 million in this building and 30, I lost the numbers there, 36 for the new construction. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
What,
If I could just caveat qualify.
yep,
Right now, these are gross assumptions around these costs. The next step is all the hard work we have to do to figure out how do we achieve that budgetary goal. And I know the question from everybody is, we need certainty today. That, unfortunately, that is not how the design
Right.
process and ultimately the construction process works. You start, usually at this step, you wouldn't even have a number. We did this study to try to see where we thought this thing was going to land order of magnitude. That stage 2 process gets you to what RIDE will typically qualify as a schematic level of plan. I would qualify it maybe a little bit less. I think it's a schematic light. That's when you really get your first true look at what you believe the cost of the project to be. Then you go through your stage 2 approval. Then you either bond then or, whenever that bonding process is. Then you go through 3 to 4 more rounds of cost estimating and design process.
Right.
So you're being much more speculative at these early stages about
Right.
what things cost. So to answer a question, I know somebody asked, well, are we going to get new ceilings in here? That would be the goal, but right now, we don't know what's in and what's out.
Right.
Because we're talking big buckets.
I've said it before, and I think this is one of the nice features of this program versus trying to renovate the 1954 high school. This buffer, and it is that, this is a building that is habitable, this is a building that serves a school purpose right now.
Today. Yep.
Effectively. we have this $15 million buffer that we can work with. And I think that that is the flexibility that we need in whatever project we do going forward. My question, though, is the application, Stage 2 application is due on the 17th of February, am I not mistaken?
No.
What's the date?
So we defer.
September.
I'm
If you
sorry.
recall, we deferred till September.
You're right.
yeah.
I got my
Rob, if that's
6-month
correct,
period.
I gotta
Yeah,
go,
wow,
if that's
you
right.
had me very nervous. Right. Good, yeah.
So in essence, you were almost restarting
Yep.
Stage 2 again, because you've now introduced, if the collective committees decide to go forward, you're now really starting in earnest the planning, programming, and kind of design process around this, as well as what we are going to have to figure out for the modifications to the elementary school and the Broad Rock programs that have already gone through an extensive amount of design to kind of get them back to a budget standpoint.
So the buffer thing is important. I think it does give us a lot more flexibility than the high school renovation ever was going to have. But you don't want to use this as the only buffer. What have we got built in for contingency on our $62 million high school component?
We have 6 or 8%. We had between 6 and 8. I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me, but between 6 and 8%.
Is that standard?
Contingency. Well, renovation cost, you want to do a little close to 10, 8 to 10, depending on what you're renovating. Next, we would want to do during Stage 2 is use the DPW backhoes to do some test pits around the area to find out if there's any ledge, what the water table is. That'll give us an indication of the subsurface cost, whether it be foundation or drainage that we'd have to put into the building. That gives us more of a standard look. If it was extremely wet or had a lot of ledge outcroppings, then you could add more cost per square foot
So
for that.
I haven't done school buildings in Rhode Island before. I have no idea what standard practice around here is, but for school construction. But at this stage, 15-20% contingency would be common in other sectors.
Well, you usually typically have what they call a design contingency. If you look at all our cost estimates, they had a construction contingency, they had a design contingency, because you're at such the infantile state. But remember, our charge was, does the program work inside this building?
But
That
if
was
we
our
hit
charge.
a change order that we can't fund, it doesn't work.
Absolutely. As any bond in any city, in any state, you have a cap. That cap would be whatever that bond is, and you'd work backwards from that. You'd establish your contingency. By the time you get to the bond, you'd know what the site is. Sub-site exploration would already be done. Your plans, as was alluded to earlier, was schematic design, so you'd have sections, you'd have elevations, you'd have forecast estimates. So as Sam, there'll be plenty of times to revisit that same plan and more refine that budget.
So if you don't mind if I can ask a question, you brought up the ledge situation, and I know previously, when it was, we had asked if this was a doable site, ledge was brought up, and was brought up as a prohibitive factor. And I'm curious as to why it was deemed prohibitive then, but now it hasn't truly been dug into and looked at. So I guess that's my question comes in as to, like, it's a potential that once you dig in, it's like, whoa, this is a deal breaker. But
Not necessarily.
did we think that the first time, and that's why it
So-
was not on the table in the first place?
The first time we looked at this site, we looked for a brand-new high school at a different position. So it wasn't this one.
Further back, correct, Dave?
Sometimes ledge, there's two types of ledge in New England. There's what they call a shale, which you can take from an excavator and break it up. There's other ones that you can't. You have to use dynamite too. The ones that are subsurface that you can apply your foundation right to, it's probably the best foundation there is, right? Because that's not going anywhere. So you drill and dowel into that and you build your forms around that, and that makes a good foundation. But you don't find that out until after you excavate and find out what level it is, how many feet below the surface it is, and you can characterize the type of rock if there is any rock down there. So there's different characteristics we go to that next stage with.
So we've talked about ledge before. This is a piece of property that we've done a lot of work on over the years. We know ledge exists here. Have you looked at any of the records to identify what we've learned in the past so we don't have to duplicate any efforts?
No, so what our charge was to do to see if the program fit inside the school and what it was and the order of magnitude price. We did look at 2 wings, we could put a second floor. So if we did find ledge and we weren't able to go out footprint-wise, that we could always go another story. So there's 2 wings you could put a second story on. As a matter of fact, one of our latest plans shows provisions for an elevator and some stairs for that reason, if you ever wanted to expand the future, or if you came out to any kind of water or rock outcropping situation, to be able to handle it that way.
Yeah, and yeah, Dave, so in terms of the elevator, we were thinking when we're doing the construction now, in case we ever in the future need to add a second floor as well, to have it in place so you don't have to tear it up.
Yep, you do a pit, you do an elevator pit, and then you put a slab in with a joint around the edge so you can just break it out later. and
Right.
have your
So
elevator pit.
one of my concerns is also, we know this is a high-level overview, and as we go further into the process, we're going to get more definitive numbers. But in the back of my mind, I just worry that we're not going to have enough money, potentially. So I guess the question I have for maybe Linda or Mary Ann, do we really need to do an addition to Broad Rock at this point, or are there other potential ways we could fix that?
We're working on researching that. We've looked at, we toured South Road today, Sam and Tracy and I. We'll take another look at Broad Rock. I'm not sure that we could completely say, no, we don't have to do anything there, and really consider the budget in the future and also the educational programming. If you isolate 8th grade, there's implications to funding that in the future, what that looks like. So to have a administrator, a nurse, all that kind of goes with that long-term. With that said, our next charge is really, as we talked through everything today, it felt to me like it was to look at Broad Rock again and really say, okay, if we're adding one cohort of students there, what do we really need to kind of go, and then how can we still make it better? We know we struggle with the cafeteria there today. How can we rethink that? So still make some improvements, but then maybe scale back from the 17 million or so that we've talked about.
Is your mic on?
Yes. I'm asking Tracy to come up, because Tracy did a quick thumbnail sketch of a couple of scenarios of adding 8th grade only to South Road and the cost for that. So what we were trying to do in the office is to say, what the town manager had brought up the other night, can we save any money? If we've allocated 17 million for Broad Rock, can we save 17 million by doing something else?
Or any portion thereof, but yeah.
Yeah, so we did that thumbnail, and these are thumbnail numbers. Tracy knows them really well based on square foot and ride regulations and costs. So Tracy, I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure, so we did some other quick alternate schemes to see if there are some options to not have to build as much at Broad Rock Middle School. One option was potentially using South Road School for an 8th grade academy. We toured that today, but we had been familiar with that building, been through it before. We looked at the number of classrooms that would be required and the support space, so the classrooms that are there could accommodate the grade level, may have to be modified for some larger spaces or technology spaces. Obviously, it was built as an elementary school, has a small cafegimatorium type scenario, so that does not meet rides requirements for a middle school gymnasium. So a gymnasium would have to be constructed to support South Road. But there could be modifications to the existing building on the interior to support the 8th grade. The superintendent would have to weigh in onto the educational plan of having an isolated grade. We also,
Came up the cost for South Road. I think it was a savings of $5 million.
right. So we were looking at potentially with a new gym and renovations required for the HVAC system, windows, potentially about $11 million to renovate South Road for the 8th grade, which would be about a $5 to $6 million savings between the Broad Rock option. We also looked at, could we incorporate the 8th grade into this plan here at Curtis Corner, and what would that be? And that would result in a little bit less, about $5 million, so potentially about a $10 million savings.
So both of those scenarios, that doesn't go into educational planning.
Right.
Busing.
Sure.
Added principals, assistant principals. So we deferred over to Linda for that one. We just gave them a bricks and mortar, kind of a high-level look at what you could potentially save by trading the blocks, if you will.
Right, and then the other thing we're just starting to explore is there are a lot of 21st century spaces and technology spaces that are incorporated into Broad Rock. Could there be some reduction on some of that to minimize the plan over there?
Any other questions from anyone on the committee?
Just one other note. I note that your $85 million budget has already got an add-on there. If we could figure out how to do it, there's a $3.4 million additional cost for bringing the administration building, which is out here, into the new structure. So we're not at 85, we're at 88.4.
So, okay, there's a question, we don't have to do that, right? So we asked both Linda and Mary Ann, what was the situation with the building? There's a couple of situations. When the building was built originally, it's a single width block wall, so its insulation value is probably a R4, where it should be like a 30 or a 29. So you're just putting a skin on the outside with some rain shields. You can increase the utilization rate of the mechanical system and repopulate the spaces on the inside. So for minimal cost, you could change the configuration of that building and still get the same result. It's not ride reimbursable unless it's an appendage of the actual building, which this building would be.
Right.
So you lose that 50% or potential 50% there as well.
And your 3.4 was without the reimbursement or with reimbursement? Is that after reimbursement?
It was just a below the
Yeah.
line.
It's got to be before. 6.8 would be crazy, yeah.
Just to demonstrate that if you decided that that was going to be part of the new
Yeah.
construction program, that would be an added cost. I think to Linda's point, she said, look, we can survive over in that building, but we wanted to look at that option to see, A, could we program it in there, and then B, what do we think that possibly is going to happen?
It could also be an alternate. It is at the end, so you could go with the construction and then do that as an alternate as well.
Yeah, what we did find out, by doing a bricks and mortar calculation, it tells you descriptively what you can't do, how much the cost is. But by adding all these additions, by modifying this site, what we did find out was that it makes a fantastic site for a campus for South Kingston, both now and in the future.
Agreed.
And it gives you different venues for the town, as well as not if you have kids. If, like my case, my kids are in college, so I could come in walking paths and use it for that. I could go to the tennis courts and use it for that. So I think you've got to look at that way, where the high school is kind of restricted on where you could park, what you could do, any expansion possibilities. So it was an answer for the immediate time, not for long-term. This is an answer for South Kingston for next couple of generations. I think that's the way you should look, because you're spending so much money.
I agree, and I think that's why South Road School being integrated here as opposed to being disposed of and therefore unavailable for the community in the future, there's a lot to be said for, embracing that campus approach, I think.
But I have a question. South Road is currently offline, so in addressing the newer and fewer, right? So now we're going to bring something that's offline back online. What are the implications for ride reimbursement when we bring something that's offline back?
I think, Debbie, you got to look at, we went through that whole scenario of saving 5 or 10 million. Educationally, I don't think Linda talked too much about it. Maybe you can add, there's probably added cost in that, because you are bringing another facility online. There is other expenses for teachers.
Right. But as far as the bonus incentives, you would still be able to get the newer and fewer if it was packaged as one project, because you would still be closing the Columbia Street High School.
Right, but we're bringing another building in place of that, right?
But
So
Yes.
we're not fewer, we're the same number of buildings. We might be newer, but we won't be fewer.
Our recommendation was not to go to South Road.
Right.
Our recommendation was to stay here.
Right.
So I have a question about the $15 million. that we're talking about in the not estimate for renovation of the current building that we just walked through. So when we were looking at the Columbia Street High School project, we had talked about the building would have an 80% renovation. At this $15 million, assuming all goes well, we don't have to shift any of that to other costs, what would the renovation level estimate be for what we walked through tonight?
We used a number of $125 a square foot for 100%, the renovation, not 80%.
Okay.
So you have to take your high school cost, and then because we waited an extra year, you got to add 6% inflation. And I think the other benefit of here is that this school would be totally non-existent as far as pupils. So a contractor could work throughout the year instead of being restricted for phasing, which adds cost and escalation to the high school price.
But if, as Rob mentioned, if we have to pull any money from that 15,000, if we have trouble, in any other aspect, that 100% goes down.
Yeah, what you do is you do deduct alternates on your bid packages. So let's say you did a painting package where the entire school got a paint job, or the entire school got new ceilings and lights and paint and heating and a roof. That was your primary. And then your secondary would be different types of levels of finish. So you'd have a level 1 finish, level 2 finish, level 3 finish. And you would just divide your drawings based on what areas had level 1, level 2, level 3. And you divide your bid package where the contractor could then bid on multiple levels. So then when you get bids, then you go shopping. What can I afford, what am I not going to afford? And then you look for your contingencies. Like, do they rise up to 8%, 10%? And then you make a wish list, because when the construction is going through the process, some of the finishes are done on 70% of construction complete. So you may have 80% of your contingency left at 70% completed construction. Suddenly you have money you can spend. So now you upgrade that finish level. So you hold a contract to those prices using unit prices and levels, and you say at 70%, okay, we want to take this tier and we want to make this the second level tier. So we would navigate you through that whole process, through the building committee. You would know one step, every step of the way, what we're doing, what we're not doing, how's it going, how's it not going at that point. We do this, I know this is a lot of money, and it's tough and it's stressful because this is all the money you got. But every town and city deals with the same thing. They have a cap bond, they can only work backwards from that.
Mr. Chairman? Dave, you're getting right at the core of my concern about where we are right now. It's not so much that this is all the money we've got, it's that this is all the money we've got, and it's a complicated project with a whole lot of moving parts. Wings on a middle school, improvements in 4 elementary schools, a renovation of this building and the construction of an addition to this building to make it a high school, and the disposal of a high school. That's a lot of projects to work into 5 years. There's a lot of complexity in 5 years. What's your thoughts on?
Do it every day. You know, it's no
But-
difficult than the
but-
security additions you just did, only at a
And
lower volume.
we had add-ons, we had additions to that we hadn't accounted for, and it was a relatively small project. They didn't bust the budget, they didn't kill us. But if we had the same sort of problems arise on an 85 million, it's not a project, on one of the 6 projects that constitutes the $85 million suite, we're in trouble.
So, Rob, you could use that for any project that goes on. New building, existing building, even residential. You don't know what you got, that's why you do all the investigative beforehand, you do multiple cost estimates beforehand, you set up the bid sheet, you set up the bid packages for that reason. You navigate through that, that's what we do for a living, right? So you navigate through that process. So from your end of it, there's a lot of risk. But in any construction project, there's risk. That's why you have a contingency. So when you have a bond, you're capped with that amount of money, and you back into that money. You use that contingency for that reason, like I spoke earlier, is
Right.
use it as a wish list. You navigate through that. There's never going to be a point where you find yourself deeply in trouble, you don't have any money left, and you got a school halfway done.
We
That only
almost,
happens-
we almost had entryways that had tables as the desks, or as the counters, because we hadn't put money into the budget to build the countertops.
You know, that's a perfect example. On that job, we just talked about the security budget. We had a contingency. We didn't use any of it, did we? None, 0. So when you look at that job, you're going to have issues where you break a wall down, there's something in that wall you didn't expect to see. That's where you use your contingency. But as Tom alluded to, when you have a contractor that's working with other subs, you go as a momentum. So there's a bartering system that works and gets applied there. So you build into your drawings different contingencies, different allowances for that such manner. So those are called unit prices. So when you do unit prices, you bid those unit prices out so that the contractor can't come back and change order you at a higher rate than normal.
So let me ask the question this way. Given that this community hasn't dealt with this many projects and hasn't certainly dealt with projects of this scale in anyone's experience at the table, I think, what's your advice on how to manage this complex set of things that we're contemplating?
So I'm going to speak, and you can add in there, Sam, if you want to, but
How much time do we have?
yeah, I mean, I think the benefit of this school being unoccupied, I would go with a general contractor here. If you're going to go with a CM model, you're going to pay a percentage more for a CM model. I would only recommend a CM model like we were doing in the existing high school. You had an occupied building where you had to have trades going in and out at the same time. I could put a fence around this building and I'd build it, and you wouldn't hear anything till the day you open it up. So you can make it less complicated by doing that. Okay, so I would take them in two different packages. You do maybe the new school in one package, Broad Rock in the other package, the elementaries in the other package. So in theory, you could have 3 contractors working on all those 3 jobs. If you do hire a construction manager, you're going to pay that amount of percentage for them to manage. But you get an OPM, you get an architect, you get an engineer. RIDE has their own OPMs now. You've got more than enough people looking at what's going on.
So you're bringing up the timing stuff, and just so I'm clued in, have we, when thinking about your cost estimate, your order of magnitude budget, is there any escalation in there, or are those today's dollars?
We put an escalation of when we thought it would be construction.
All right.
So there is in there.
And what was, it's a 6%?
6% on
Yeah,
average we use.
okay.
So at this point, we would ask, as Sam just alluded to, we would ask the committee for the next steps. There's always a lot of money you go for these bonds. Every school is looking to do this. I was just at the State House today, and perhaps Ms. Lopes, Metcalfs know this. When the $250 million was approved, we were expecting this upcoming November for another $250 million. It was told to us today that the state didn't even spend that money, so they got to wait till 2022 to come out with more money. So what does that tell you? Now, every town goes after that money. Every town's grappling with the same thing. But what you shouldn't ignore is that the state of Rhode Island's giving you more percentage back, potentially, than they ever have in the history of the state. And that's what you shouldn't ignore, both as a townsperson and as a taxpayer. So don't get frightened for the price, because they're only going to go up. That's a good quote for the paper tomorrow, right?
So the next step would entail what, Dave?
So I would think, as Sam alluded to, as I'm going to say, and certainly Tracy would agree to, is the next step, we believe that we've opened up this potential for a great site for the schools in the future. What we would ask next is the building committee, and then goes to the school committee, asks us to go to that next stage 2 for this project, and to put the 3 together for submission in November, or September, I should say, September 15th, for a November decision, and hopefully a November vote. You want everyone in the town to vote on it. We can get into the tactics on how to do that, even though you're not going to get that 50% letter from RIDE. You'll have a strong encouragement up to that point. RIDE makes their decision maybe the 3rd week of November, and typically the vote is the 1st week of November. So within 2 weeks, you know about that. The town council still has governance over that money, so that worst case scenario, if the thing passed and you didn't get reimbursed, at that point, the town council could reconvene and decide how much money they could spend. So you do still have breaks and contingencies left in that decision. But I wouldn't ignore where we are right now and simply put this away, or to kick the can down the road, because every time you do that, you lose 6% of that money, and that's about $4 million every time you do that.
Yeah, and we've talked in the past about the pros and cons of having either a special election versus doing it at the general election. I mean, I've felt strongly from the beginning that we should do whatever we can to have it at the general election, because it's such an important decision for the entire town that I want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to either vote yes or no on the bond. Or
Agreed.
hopefully yes, but, you want people to have their, opinion heard and vote counted.
I would like to commend the building committee for doing this. I mean, one of the questions we got, I think it was a week and a half ago at the school committee meeting was, why didn't you think of this before? This is all a step-by-step type process. So the superintendent obviously spearheaded this decision, but we wouldn't have been in this position if we didn't know where we were at the high school. So through this effort, I know it's been an exhausting effort, you've now narrowed exactly what you want to do, and you now have created or potentially created a great campus, both for the students and for the people of the town. That's something to be said when you're doing that. So I don't think it's been a waste of time and a waste of money. I think it's a good thing that you did to kind of refine your thoughts and to refine the direction. And I got to say, I think we've been working here for, 5 years in the town? And we've never seen the building committee, the school committee, and the town council all be in favor of a direction. And I think that's fantastic. For our experience of doing this in multiple towns, you rarely see that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the school building committee make a recommendation to the school committee to move ahead with a Stage 2 application that focuses on Curtis Corner Middle School being reused as a portion of the high school.
Rob, before we vote on that, should we discuss the deed restriction question?
Yeah, my thought was we'd get the motion on the table and then it'd come up during discussion.
So I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Of the deed.
Yes, one of the questions that has come up in the community is whether there are deed restrictions that prevent the disposal of the high school at Curtis Corner. A memorandum was circulated to members of this committee from the town solicitor's office earlier today. And the answer is no. The answer is no and yes. The two buildings, the current high school and the Hazard School, were deeded with restrictions that they be used only for school purposes. Those deeds were executed prior to 1953 when the state of Rhode Island enacted a statute that voided restrictions on alienation of real property. So our attorney's position, and it's a statutory argument. It's not it's not some fancy legal argument. We've got advice that says the deed restrictions, the title restrictions are not enforceable. So the property under the buildings is property that we have free and clear and that we can sell, that we can dispose of. There's all sorts of questions about the economic value, whether or not we're beginning at Town Hall to prepare a request for information to go out to the market in February. In fact, we're scheduling a community meeting. We haven't had a chance to talk to the superintendent about this. We'd like to do it on a Saturday at the high school to get the community, the neighbors, in talking about what they'd like to see. So we've got some visioning around what could happen with the old high school building. Once we've got some input from the community, we can put the request for information out to the market, and we can begin to hear from potential developers. We're looking for institutional developers. We're looking for folks associated with higher education. We're looking for anybody who's got use for building of that size. It's a big 230,000 square foot building. It's a bunker. It's not going to be an easy, sort of affordable housing renovation, but there's going to be a use out there. I suspect we've got to get out to the market and ask folks what they think we can do with it. The best way for us to do that is to talk to folks in the neighborhood, make sure we're not running afoul of the needs and expectations of the neighborhood, and then get out and talk to developers and see what folks have got to say. All of that can be done relatively quickly. We're not going to have a developer, with a signed agreement anytime soon, but we can begin to get a sense of what can be done there. The yes portion, the restriction portion of the property pertains to the field. The field is subject to a federal encumbrance. We took a federal grant to develop the field for recreational purposes, and when we did so, we promised that we would use it for recreational purposes and only recreational purposes in perpetuity. This is the town farm park problem again. It's the same grant program. So we do have a restriction on the land that is the field. We have no restrictions that would prevent us from disposing of the buildings.
The field isn't, I mean, the field's pretty big, but it's not
The
huge.
field is, we looked it up today, it's 3.something, 3.6, 3.7 acres. It's large, it's not inconsequential, but the rest of the site is about 7 acres, 8 acres maybe.
I have a question. So is the plan to dispose of the high school or also the Hazard building as well, or whatever?
So the way we go through the disposal process in town is we put that question out to all of the town departments. We see if there's a departmental use for the building. We're doing that with regard to South Road. We have not yet really begun that in earnest for the high school and for the Hazard school, but we will do that. If we can't come up with a good municipal use of the building, that is, a department doesn't need a rec center or doesn't need a new place to park dump trucks or something, then we go to the council and we say, look, we've got this surplus property. We don't have a municipal use. These are the options. Do you want us to go out and find a buyer? The high school is beyond the municipality's capacity to make reuse of. It's just too big. There's just no, I mean, we can move all of town hall in, all of the administration for the school in. We just cannot fill up that building. It's not possible.
Rob, to your other point, I think what people need to realize is that the RFI is really just putting it out there
That's
for
correct.
information so that we can find the best possible use. It doesn't mean that we have an idea of what we're going to be doing with that building at this point. But it's a good thing to do, and it's a good thing to make sure that we involve as many folks in town regarding that.
It's a way to start a conversation and get folks knowing that we're in the market. It's going to take us time. This is not going to be an easily disposed of property. I have some concerns based on conversations we've had with developers that it's really just too big a project. If we can't find an institution that just needs a lot of space, a hospital, I don't know, a nursing home kind of thing, a university. We've got folks we're talking to, but if we can't find an institutional user, it's going to be a tough redevelopment project, we think.
And are we looking at 2 years of redevelopment here? Construction and redevelopment from start to finish, is that?
Yes.
So we're several years from the high school being available to a developer.
Correct.
I don't think we're jumping the gun, though. I
Okay.
don't think that by going out to the market and saying this is available, we're too soon. I think everybody wants to put work in their queue if they can. Everybody wants to think about a project. It takes time for folks to take on something this large.
But we
Especially-
wouldn't entertain entering into an agreement until we've gone through this process, this stage 2 process, correct?
If someone
Or the
were to-
contingency would have to be there
If-
that all of the pieces fell in place.
If the Rhode Island Community College were to show up at our door tomorrow and say,
Yeah.
hey, we hear you're getting rid of this, we want in, we'd come to the council and say, you know what? This is a pretty good fit for the community.
But it-
Right,
it
but this,
wouldn't
this,
go-
this,
it-
and this would have to happen
Right.
for
They don't
that
get the
to-
building until we vacate.
Right, so the point, I guess, would be that limiting the amount of time that the building would be empty. So for instance, if we're vacating on a particular date, we already know by a specific date that we're starting to repurpose that building rather than the building being there vacant.
And that is in fact my objective. The measure we're using here is that 1 day of vacancy is a failure. We do not want to be sitting on a vacant 230,000 square foot building. It needs to be in somebody else's hand the day that the principal hands the keys off to the superintendent. Or she gives me, however that works. But
So-
the point is, we do have the ability, the authority, the legal right to dispose of the property. I want to deal with one more piece of this because folks have, read the deeds. The deed in 1943 or 6 that made the land available to the town said you got to use it as a high school forever and ever and ever, and if you don't, then it goes to what was then the Wakefield Trust, which has been bought up by Bank of America, and Bank of America has to sell the building and use the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund for high school students out of South Kingstown. That's very, it's a very attractive thing in many ways. Again, the statute voided it, and the Bank of America has never, responded to our inquiries about this and said, no, we really have an interest in doing that. And selling it is going to be tough for anybody, not just us. Bank of America is going to have trouble if they ever were to, they're not going to, they don't have the right to, but
So
it-
how
it
would
would
we
not be a
get
solution.
clear title to this property?
Well, again, the attorney's memorandum points out that it is voided, that the condition is voided. We can clear title by going to court and saying, here's the title, here's the deed that said X, Y, and Z.
So
but
if
the
I read
statute
this
says
correctly,
otherwise.
it said we would have to sue Bank of America for the clear title because they have not responded.
It's the clearest way.
Okay.
It's the easiest way to clear title.
Right.
Right.
Deb, to answer your question, we would be looking at 2023, summer of 2023 for vacancy of the high school building, yeah.
And Dave, getting back to your other point about the campus style, granted, we're 13 individuals here, but before I was on the building committee, as someone on the town council, I definitely brought that up a number of times. So from efficiency standpoint as well, but also the location here, I think the location would work very well versus the location on Columbia Street. I was told, I think I was on the crazy train back then, but my ideas were different. And cost-wise, doing true centralized campusing is very difficult, but we're moving towards that. We're moving into a potential place where we have other options. If for some reason student population increases, we can add on to the building in the future here if we chose to at that point. I don't think that's going to happen, but I like to have all options open because we can never determine the future accurately. We have our best guess and estimates. So I do like, speaking for myself, I do like the idea of the campus here. Personally, I'd like to see one elementary school as well, but was my personal, just thinking outside the box for efficiency as well.
Just imagine, I know you've got a new driver in your house. Imagine your son driving to the high school, parking in Columbia, and then walking along the street to get to school every day.
Right.
And when you have weather like this, where sometimes the plows aren't as gracious and plow onto the sidewalks, how dangerous that is versus a campus environment where they can walk along the streets inside that campus.
Right, and we have the land. And we've already talked about, maybe Tracy or Dave, just because I don't know if everyone knows about and we have that other thing that we're talking about, but I think this is important. Traffic-wise, we've done an engineering study, and it was reported out by the engineer at our last meeting that it was viable to have.
Yep, they said there was a 20-minute window where traffic would be busy. That's in the morning when traffic would come out. But again, we modified the entrance along the side so you'd queue in the exits. So the way he did the traffic analysis, he was exiting both direction, north and south.
Right.
And queuing out those two areas.
And we're talking, just for the people in the audience, coming in off of South Road, but also coming in off of Curtis Corner.
Right. And the majority of students right now, being athletes, still have to get in their car and travel here, where now their car would be here and they'd walk. So it's even safer from a parent's point of view.
I will note, though, that not all the fields are located on this property. We do have a number of other fields that high school and middle school uses elsewhere. So while kids travel now, they will continue to have to travel.
If this becomes like the town of Smithfield, where they turned Deerfield Park, they rapidly changed the way they worked the fields. In that town, they also had an adjacent high school. That was when Tracy and I went to that high school, there was a path. Now it's developed into a bigger path, and they connect the fields. So that could potentially happen in the future. I don't know where those other fields are in proximity, but
Not connectable.
not through a bridge or an air bridge or anything like that, all right?
Also adding to this discussion in terms of what we want to do in terms of recommending this to the school committee to move on to the next stage. I don't know if Zach is prepared, and I probably should have asked you first, but in terms of numbers, what are we looking at if we look at the current estimates in terms of tax implications for folks in the town?
So it depends on how we want to structure the debt. So I would caution right now putting any numbers out until we decide what path we want to pursue. So whether it's a 20-year bond, 25-year bond, whether we want to do level debt, level principal, what interest rate we use, what we think we can get today, what we use. I mean, the most conservative approach would be level principal, 20 years at about a 4%. At 85 million with a 50% reimbursement, you're looking at, the implication in the tax rate would be roughly at a per thousand level would be about 55 cents per thousand, in that range. I mean, obviously, that's what you saw in the CIP, in the outer years. That's in the outer years, so that'd be fiscal 26, roughly. So we could work those numbers and get down to it, and depending with the different options. And I think that's what Rob's going to talk about with the kind of the little worksheet he wants to put out.
Zach, did you say 55 cents per thousand?
Just for the debt service. That, yeah,
Okay.
in that
So what
range.
would it mean for the average taxpayer?
That's what I'm doing right now.
If you had a 220. Yeah, based on a $350,000 house, in that range.
So $20 a month.
Yeah, I came up with 192.50 at 350, but at the average price,
Well, right. In the out years, if you escalate that to about 370, we'd probably be in that 250.
when you say escalated, based off of the fact that
Just inflation.
time, okay?
Yeah, time.
All right.
That's at 20, that's at 20 years.
Yeah,
So,
at 20 years.
and, I mean, there's a lot of good news in bond markets right now for municipalities. I mean, we were talking to the financial advisor the other day, and he indicated that if we were going to market today with our bond rating, South Kingstown would not be at 4%, we'd be in the 2s. But we're not going to the market today. We're going to the market years from now. So we're, it's hard to know. It's really hard to
So
know.
I have a question. Let's say hypothetically, it passes in November. At what point are we going to bond? Actually, to the bond market?
23? The first tranche in 22, 23. 22, 23, we'd do $38 million, and then 23, 24, or 24, 25?
No, it'd be earlier.
So it's 22, 23,
Right.
and then 23, 24. So $38 million in each of those 2 years, 23 through 22, 23, 23, 24, 38 each.
So I don't know how this goes into the calculation, but the bond, the approved project from RIDE, once that gets approved, that determines the amount of capital fund reimbursement that you get. That can also be applied before you have to start drawing onto that bond.
That's right, that's good. So, again, we're very optimistic that we can make a budget in this area work. My main focus my main concern here is that the complexity of this thing with so many moving parts and so little tolerance for change, we've got to continue to drive this thing in a southerly direction, otherwise we could find ourselves in a bad spot. And again, as I've described in the
Could raise his budget.
discussions at the CIP, this isn't something that is going to cause the town, qua town, hardship. The town can afford this. The town's municipal bond rating is solid. The bond markets will happily loan us money to do these projects. But the bond markets only care about the likelihood that they'll be repaid. They're not focused on the impact on all of the citizens in the community. And as I described the other night, a third of the population lives in a household that makes less than $50,000 in South Kingstown. That's not what folks think of South Kingstown.
Right.
But a third of our population lives in a household with less than $50,000 in household income. The impact on that portion of the population is not commensurate with what the community as a whole can do.
Is that based on the census, Rob?
Yes, it is. That's a American Community Survey, 2019. No, it does not. Yeah.
Yeah, they renters or owners?
Yes.
Because
Renters are-
most people I know can't own a house at 50,000 a year.
You point to you make a good point, but I will point out that renters pay tax increases through increased rent. And in fact, their incomes are more subject, or their costs are more variable because the rent can be increased, whereas mortgages tend to be fixed. So it gets dicey when we start looking at that.
Have you guys looked at the incremental costs, every $5 million, whether plus or minus, what impact that has on a town per 325 household? The reason why I asked that question is because as we refine the budget, the variable may go up and down, say $5 million. So for every $5 million, it costs X for the taxpayer. Like you can do simple division, so if it's $200 for 85 million, what is it for 5 million? Right, you can do that simple math. And
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So forgive my ignorance, but when a bond question is written for the ballot, will it say $85 million for school facilities improvements? Or will it say $65 million for high school improvements, $15 million for Broad Rock improvements? How is it written?
So it's a question for bond counsel, and you can tailor your bond question to achieve different, objectives. On some level, if the project is very well defined and you know that there's folks who have been following closely and they want to make sure that their piece is in there, it may be advantageous to make sure that their piece is listed. If it's not being watched that way, a general statement may be sufficient.
Right, so I guess my question after that is, so if we go with a question that says $85 million for school facilities improvement, and we start this project first, right, and we find the 65 looks like 70, can we rob Peter to pay Paul, is what my question.
So an example of that is the $4 million that we're about to go to market with for school improvements that was issued or was approved by voters in 2014. Those bonds have never been issued, the work has been done, but the work was whatever, it was a very broadly written school improvement bond. In that case, they had absolute flexibility. They could do almost anything.
Right. So the question doesn't have to be tied.
Mary Ann, go ahead.
Help me.
So what we've done, and just, I've also was involved with the bond project in another life, over $32 million with the middle school. And you do make this statement broad. To keep the voters informed of what you're doing, what you do is you do a Q&A. And in that Q&A, you would outline all this information so that voters will have it. When, again, I agree with Rob, it's up to bond counsel to advise us as to how best to present this to the voters. It has to go to the General Assembly, has to be approved, the Secretary of State. So it has to go through a number of hoops to get approved, and experts with much more expertise than we have will be advising us as to how best to do this. But I would suggest you want to make sure you keep yourself available to the flexibility, because that can happen. Something can happen where you don't want to tie yourself into a $65 million high school bond. Suppose if it comes out to $63 million and then you have another $2 million. But would you like to consider that $2 million for more educational stuff that we may not be doing at the elementary schools? Then you start making some informed decisions based on the information you have. So I would rely on bond counsel and the experts, and when the time comes, be sure we really work hard on our Q&A and ask for feedback from our voters so that we can get the information out to them.
There's a gentleman called Steve Massaroni, and I think he's your bond counsel as well.
Steve is our fiscal advisor.
Yeah.
Not
So
our bond
Steve,
counsel, financial advisor.
okay, he makes himself available for building committees and town council meetings and school committee meetings, and he can explain what the steps are. And typically, like Marianne said, you do keep it vague, where you can say we're spending $85 million on the elementary, the middle, and the high school, so it gives you, the building committee, and also the town council, that variable you can work with. That's what other towns have done, so.
I think what I was looking for was some flexibility, knowing that things can change and they are going to change. It's not a secret. It's, the other thing I think we need to, I guess, I don't know if we can do this now, but in terms of, if we're going to.
Yeah, I'm going to call the question, if I may.
Sure. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Can you repeat the motion,
Sure.
please?
So the motion was?
Is something disconnected?
There it is, yeah, I did, I tried, okay. Motion made to recommend to the school committee to move ahead with the Stage 2 application for a Curtis Corner location to be reused as a high school. Not yet.
I would make a suggestion to table that motion and let for public comments.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. We'll
I'm happy to have a public comment on that before we vote.
give everyone an
Sure.
opportunity.
So I withdraw my call to the question.
And we'll revisit that after the comments from interested citizens.
Want to bump to that? Want to just move to that now? Want to go to that now?
Let me take a look
While
here. Let's continue, because we'll get through these other items rather quickly. Linda, I did see potentially visiting Barrington Middle School, and that's item number 7, discussion of visiting other districts.
So actually, Sam has helped us to schedule that, so we have a,
And this was the one that we had the snow event, I think, last time?
exactly. So we've been rescheduled for January 30th at 1:30, Barrington Middle School.
And J.C., you're going to, did you send that out yet, or will you be sending it out?
I sent a reminder about it.
Okay.
And maybe the agenda, but maybe not the agenda.
I think
But
the agenda was
agenda's-
out for approval, and my email wasn't working, so I
Yeah,
didn't see
okay,
it.
so I think I'm just waiting on your check mark on
Yep,
that.
I
We'll
responded,
get that right out.
but
Okay.
it was late.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, so that being said, that's our next visit, and Barrington, just so everyone knows, Sam, can you just talk about Barrington really quickly as to why we're going to go there and take a look?
Sure. I think when we were discussing, this is going back probably to November or October, about just new schools that have come online recently, there hasn't been a lot. Obviously, there's been a fair amount of renovation work. So we wanted to see what kind of a brand-new middle school was going to look like. Not as much to say we're going to go out and replicate another middle school here, but I think it's as important to understand kind of the 21st century learning spaces and just a modern facility in the state of Rhode Island. I mean, right now, they are the leading edge of all this new construction that's happening. There's a familiarity between Linda and obviously the superintendent there, as well as the head of the educational the programming with Paula. So we just thought it'd be a great opportunity. We still have people on the ground there, so we have a good working relationship with the district, just wrapping up the oversight of that construction process.
Thank you. Any other further discussion regarding item number 7 before we move on to item number 8? Item number 8 is we have a working group for the communications. Did you guys meet since our last meeting?
No, we have not met, but I did go to 4 out of 5 of the schools who had the vestibules, and I did get little snippets and interviews, so expect something on the website, just saying, yay, we did it, everyone's happy, success, looks good. We should have that up soon.
Who is currently in charge? Linda, are you in charge of the website? I can't.
Well, we have,
The updates, I meant to say. I'm
I've
sorry.
been putting the updates
Okay.
up there, yes.
Are you running into any challenges or anything that you need additional help with?
Well, like, this has helped to have JC go do the videos themselves. And then we did at our school committee just have a little update from Russ, and his assistant did a little kind of overview, presentation on the vestibules, just with some pictures to share with the school committee. So I'll put that just happened. So we'll put that presentation up on the website as well. So having other folks kind of take the pictures or, put together, and then it just gets uploaded, so it's not hard.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Item number 9 is comments from interested citizens. I'm going to ask that you keep your comments to 5 minutes. If we have time at the end and you hadn't finished, we can then let you go through the cycle one more time. So if anyone would like to make any public comments, there's the microphone set up. If you could state your name and I guess your street would be great. Anyone going up?
Doral Beasley. Okay, so when the Jacobs report came out, it said South Kingstown had $89 million worth of problems. That was the 8th highest amount in the state for any school district. If you take out Curtis Corner, at that point we were going to close Curtis Corner, right? So we're going to close it. So if you take out Curtis Corner, South Road, and Hazard, $63 million is what our schools say needed on the Jacobs report. That's still the number one suburban school district in the state for problems in their schools, for the 6 schools that are open now. And the problem with this is when the Jacobs report came out, they did the analysis of all our schools in this town in spring of 2016. The numbers that are in their budget or in their report include 20% soft costs, but no contingency costs. So it says right in the report you have to add your contingency cost. So that's 63. So for Broad Rock, Matunic, Peacedale, Wakefield, and West Kingston, so I took out the high school. In 2016, without the contingency, was $40 million worth of problems. With it was 44. Today, in 2021, which is when I guess we're going to start doing something, maybe, with inflation, is going to be up to 56 million. I say this because we're kidding ourselves here. In the fall of 2002, when Broad Rock opened up, at that point we had 8 schools open. Our enrollment had already started to decline. So in 1999 to 2000 school year, we had 4,400 students. A few years later, South Road closes. It was about 3,900. And today we have over 1,000 less students. Okay, so when South Road closed, we had 7 open schools. Today we have 7 open schools with 1,000 less students. We have one school, Wakefield, this year is half full, 50%, with 260. And we're talking about bringing South Road back online as an 8th grade academy. What the hell are we thinking here, folks? Really, I'm serious. This is insane. Now, this email I sent everybody this afternoon, I sent it to everybody. I've been working on this for months. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room who just want me to go away. My wife would like me to quit. One end of the living room, we have a very small house, so one end of the living room is my office, quote-unquote office. It's a zoo. Now, if you get a chance to look at the stuff that I sent out to everybody today, I am convinced that this school district can fix all our schools, build a brand-new high school, do almost all the renovations that we need for our elementary schools, every other school. But it requires two things. The first thing is we're not going to, with the declining enrollment, we do not need to put additions on the Broad Rock. That has to go away. There's another spreadsheet in here I hope that the superintendent will look at. At the bottom of it, you'll see last October's NESDEC report of their forecast. It's also there. It's how you can populate the schools by using Peacedale as the new Broad Rock. So Peacedale would be 5 and 6, and it would also be the Early Learning Academy. You have PK in there now. So, and I looked at the gym stuff and everything outside. It looks like there's a lot of things there for that kind of age students. So it doesn't make sense to me to then take pre-K early learning program and then send it over to Wakefield.
Darrell, you hit 5 minutes, so if you could finish up a little bit, and then we'll let you come back at the end, if that's okay.
Okay, I'll stop there.
All right, thank you.
Good evening. Dave Palazetti, 71 Pedal Lane. I want to thank Mr. Chairman for having an opportunity to comment before the vote. I appreciate that. I have some, and for full disclosure, as related to some of the things I'll say later, I'm the chairman of the South Kingstown Recreation Commission. I had some prepared remarks, but before I get into those, I was frankly a little taken aback by some of the discussion up here. I was taken aback by the fact that our engineering firm, our hired engineering firm, is our biggest cheerleader right now to maximize the construction projects that are going on in this town. With my experience, the engineers are the first ones paid in every project. So to answer your question, Rob, what happens when your building's half full or half finished and you run out of money? Well, that's your problem. And the architects are already paid, and they're already gone on to their next project, at least 90% of their money. So I'd feel better about the cost estimate maybe if RGB would like to be paid at the end of the project. So it's a new model, but if you guys are on board with that, I'd be on board as well. So on to my prepared comments. While I'm not optimistic that the required property transfer of the existing high school could even occur to enable this project, and I drive by the North Kingstown Middle School that sits vacant just about every day because it's close to where I work. But there are other folks working on this project, and they're more qualified than I am in real estate, and I'll let them render an opinion on whether or not that can actually happen. But in my opinion, if one day of it being vacant is a failure, I would plan to fail, especially if the economy shifts and there's no need for that property. But I'll leave the analysis to other folks. Having spent numerous hours myself in the current high school over the past 7 years, I personally feel that building has very strong bones. It's a good building. It functions well as a high school. Yeah, it's not perfect. It's old, but it's ours, and it works. Having grown up around Chicago, it's better than a lot of schools out there, and we get educated. But that's not why I'm here tonight. What I'm here to focus on is if a high school could be built at this location, the Curtis Quarter location, is the proposed design that we see up here, is that a good one? For the past 7 years, I've been the Director of Facilities and Operations for the University of Rhode Island Bay campus. Prior to that, I was a Public Works Director for the United States Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. And I say that only to say that I know a couple things about maintaining and operating academic buildings. From my perspective, this particular high school design will have an exceptionally high operating cost throughout its entire life cycle, affecting school budgets and thus our local taxes for decades. My reasoning for this is that the current plan is for a sprawling 1-acre addition that retains portions of a 56-year-old middle school that has not been properly maintained due to lack of funding for most of its life, lack of maintenance funding for most of its life. As a single-story structure, that means for a 160,000 square foot building, which is proposed, you will have a full 160,000 square foot of flat roof to maintain. This is particularly difficult and expensive in coastal New England weather conditions, especially when most of your HVAC equipment is on the roof exposed to that weather. Other problems with large one-story structures include higher fuel usage to operate heating and cooling equipment to make up for the energy loss through that large roof area. You just don't have the R value. We heard that the R value is like 5 or 6 on some of the older buildings here, so you're going to have to do a lot of work to build that up. There's a greater number of small heating and cooling units that need to be distributed around a large building just to help balance the loads. So you got a lot of small units you got to maintain. The larger footprint corresponds with a loss of green space on this site. And if we had the other slide up, you could see that while there is a huge lot of acres, go up a little bit, that one there, yep. They fill everything between the roads and the stadium. There's no green space left adjacent to the high school, unless you want to walk down a trail past a parking lot into the fields. That also means you've got more stormwater management structures that need to be installed and maintained. You can't just walk away from them, especially if they're rain gardens and things like that, to mitigate the large volume of site runoff. And RGB's design is using and repurposing portions of an existing building that they previously stated was one of the worst of the entire school inventory. I can only imagine what additional construction and redesign costs will occur when you start to open up the walls of this tired structure. I suspect, and actually after hearing things today, I pretty much know that RGB arrived at the design configuration in an effort to make the initial construction costs fit into a Is that 5 minutes?
Yes.
Couldn't have been. Can I have 2 more?
Why don't we, if you don't mind, just out of fairness.
Sure.
His thought process is going on here. I can hear an ending coming, so I think you should let him
How's that one
finish.
page? I want to go.
If no one opposes, it's fine. Okay.
Let him speak, let him speak.
Sorry. I'm being a hog, I know. I do this at my own meetings, too. So where was I? I suspect that they arrived at the design configuration to fit into a budget. And we do that. We do that as engineers. It's what we have to do. I'm not criticizing them, but it's the fact. But my point is, let's not forget that while the construction of these buildings additions is cost-shared up to 55%, that the operating costs for the life of these buildings is 100% funded by the taxpayers of South Kingstown. Therefore, if you are able to somehow transfer the current high school, I would strongly recommend you demolish all of this current building and build a multi-story high school here. With that approach, you can build a more energy-efficient building on a smaller footprint, and while there could be some additional construction costs due to the need for elevators and stair towers, those costs would pale in comparison when you consider the annual energy savings of a modern, properly insulated building envelope with centralized, high-efficient heating and cooling equipment, vice what is currently being proposed. And besides those life cycle costs, other benefits of a multi-story building would include more green space around the building, which allows you to, first of all, solve the terrible bleacher system that we have in our current stadium, which I've been to most of them. This is the worst in the entire state. The current design doesn't change that at all. You could possibly add an outdoor physical education field adjacent to the school, similar to the hazard field at the existing field that we said was 3 acres. Find 3 acres immediately adjacent to that high school right now. You can't do it. You can't go to gym class, walk out, and you're in a field. If you had less of that site being used, you could further improve the traffic flow on and around the site, and I do agree that there are some benefits of getting off the Columbia Street. Potentially eliminate the need to remove and rebuild the tennis courts if you didn't use up all the site and went vertical. And this is the Parks and Recs Department talking. Right now, you've put a parking lot on one of our rec fields and in the middle of 4 holes of our very popular disc golf course. You just cut it right in half and paved over the entire thing. That is not acceptable to the Parks Department. And lastly, if you design the new building from scratch and put it on this footprint where you know there's no ledge, you already built on this once, you know exactly what's underneath here, all right, you would have an interior building layout that was far superior to this disjointed plan that they've had to work in around this existing building. So in summary, I'm not endorsing nor encouraging the closure of the existing high school. However, if it is determined that this site does make the best sense for per the long-term facilities plan, then I ask you to build a high school that makes the most long-term sense for this site, to make it a true campus with green space around it, make it best for the building's functionality and for the future operations and operating budgets that the town will be paying for. I don't believe this particular design meets any of those three objectives.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman, if I could just answer some of the, I just want to go over the false statements. I won't go into it. Everyone has their right to an opinion. Certainly, you can build a new building. We can build a 10-story building if you want to build. It's just how much do you want to pay for, right? But some of the things is, as far as payment goes, RGB hasn't been paid in over a year. So I wouldn't want to resemble that one again. So that's number one. So what you do is you get paid as you progress through the construction. So does the contractor. Second one is as far as efficiency. The most efficient and most cost-effective is to go out sprawling, not up and down. There is more cost added to go up and down. If we ran into kind of rock or water, we would go up and down. There is an energy code. You got to meet the energy code. So even though this building does not meet the energy code, we would have to meet the energy code, which means extra insulation in the roofs and the walls, and the systems have to be Energy Star rated to hit the CHIPS New England requirements. Third is, these are schematic plans. They're subject to change or whatnot. It wasn't us that said that this was the worst building. That was Jacob's report that valued them as the most and the worst. So I would just caution people when they make that leap, they should check their facts so that people out there understand what the real facts are and not just opinions. Everyone has their opinions, and opinions are always good. You can go either way with it, but we should just stick with the facts so that they don't get sprawled the wrong way, because we'll end up fighting those opinions further on. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to come up?
Hi, Stacy Bozzioni, Pond Street. I'm so glad that you're considering this site. I'm so grateful to our new superintendent for asking for the slowdown and to take a second look. I know. And to take a second look here, and I'm really grateful. And I don't know who said it, whether it was Peregrine or RGB, but the idea of the high school here being something that the whole community can use, really, I hadn't thought about before now, and it makes a lot of sense, and I think that would be a really great thing for all of us in South Kingstown. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lauren Weinstock, Pine Hill Road. That was exactly the same comment I was going to make. In the community where I grew up, the high school is the center of the town. It is what brings people to the community, and it is on a true campus. And I just very recently visited my hometown on a weekend and drove by the high school and actually stopped and walked around just for nostalgia's sake. And what struck me was how there were so many people on a Saturday running the track, playing tennis, walking through the grounds. It was a place where people come together. There were no sporting events that particular day. It was actually a holiday weekend. But it really brought home to me the value of a campus-based school, not just for the students who go to the school, but for the community as a whole. And this proposal, in my mind, has the potential to serve all of us in the community, not just the students. They also host, for example, dance recitals in the auditorium at the high school on the weekends, things of that nature. So when we think about a plan like this, I really would recommend. There's a lot of potential, some criticisms, some opinions, but I don't want the potential benefits to be lost in those discussions. I also just want to speak very briefly about the point of how long it has taken to get to this place. And I remember having attended a building committee meeting, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, where it was really stressed how stage 2 is the point in the process where no stone is left unturned, and we're really exploring all the options. And I really do feel like that's what we've been doing, and it's gotten us to a place where we're getting closer to where we need to be to move forward with stage 2. So I just want to thank all of you for being patient with the process and working together to make it happen. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and also to the OPM and RGB and the contractors, with the security updates, the parking lots moving forward. There's a lot to be excited about, and I felt like it was important to acknowledge that publicly. So thank you to the building committee for your efforts.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? All right, Doral, you can come back up.
All right, so the problem is we have too many people working in the school district now, before you start throwing stuff at me. Back when Broad Rock opened up, over the 2-year period, the school committee and the town council decided we needed 100 new employees. So we went from 520 employees in 1998 to 620 employees. Of course, the enrollment was starting to decline, and Broad Rock, didn't really need that school to begin with. But those 100 people that we hired, they still work here. So we had 8.5 people working for 8.5 students for every person working in the district in 1998. And that was 1 year after South Kingstown High School won its second in a row state decathlon. And we went from we had 8.5 students per employee. And last year, it was down to 6.1. Now, it went up significantly this past, over the summer. 30-some people retired or they weren't asked to come back. So now we're down to up to 6.36. If I asked the administration to send me the records for the last decade of people retiring, the retirees every year. So I did that calculation today. So on the average over the last 10 years, every year we have like 1.5 administrators leave, 8 teachers, 3.5 ESP people, and about 1.5 Council 94 custodians and the like. So it's like 15 people a year on average have left this district every year for the last decade.
Doral, just so you know, you have 2 minutes left.
Okay. So we need to not rehire people. We need to continue to let the retirement lower the number of people that are working here. So we had 485 last year. We have 450 right now. So over the next 10 years, you'd want to get down to 330, because at that time you're only going to have supposedly like 2,400 and change students here. So we're going to lose another 400 students. It's time to rein in these costs. If you do so, then if you'll see here, the costs level off. The 35 people that left this district last year, that's $3.5 million, more or less. It's about $100,000 per employee. That was the average for the district last year. $3.5 million was off the books. But I'm looking at this year's budget. I don't see where the 3.5 is off the budget. There's something not right with the budget, and I just think there's some extra money in there that I don't know what you're going to do with, but it doesn't seem to be you said you had a placeholder for the raises, but something's not right. But
You have 30
I
seconds.
hope, I would like to come to talk to the superintendent, the town manager, anybody about this. This would work. This works. And we could build a new high school here and fix other schools and lower the taxes. This would lower taxes over the next decade and the tax rate.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak before we close comments from interested citizens? All right. So what I'd like to do is go back to your motion and maybe open it up for a quick discussion again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just respond to a couple of the things that have been said here. Dave Pelizzetti's a smart man, and he makes excellent points with regard to the long-term operational costs of any structure. Doral Beasley is beating an operational budget problem that we have as well, and we're going to have to figure it out, because every dollar we put into facilities is a dollar that is not going to be available for operations. Every dollar we put into debt service is a dollar that's not there to pay for a teacher sometime in the future. We have to keep this project constrained, not only because there's a portion of the community who is going to feel this pain different than the rest of us, but because it affects the long-term operations. I wish this were Massachusetts. I wish the state were coming in with 80%, 90% funding for this project. They're not. We've got 10,000 households, 10,000 residences, and 3,000 commercial or industrial properties in town that pay the whole boat for our 50% on this thing. That's all on us. We've got 10,000 residences, 350 of those are million-dollar-plus homes. 2,000 are below the state sales average this year. 2,000 of those properties are worth less than $250,000.
And how many are under the affordable number that the state has?
About that, well, it's actually quite a bit more than
Right.
that. It would be closer to a third of the housing stock is under the state number for affordable housing. We are constrained here. We're in a box that is very uncomfortable. That means we can't do things like build up when it would be wise to build up. We can't afford to go vertical. We should go vertical. We can't afford to tear down and build anew. We should tear down and build anew. This project has the greatest potential, in my view, of success because it is the most flexible given the constraints the community is dealing with. I think this is the right project. It's in many ways superior to remaining on a site that can never expand. We can't improve the sports facilities at the Columbia Street site. We can't build, in fact, we've already encroached. I mentioned earlier that we've got a federal restriction on the property that is the playing field. We've already built an addition on that field in violation of that federal covenant. We can't go anywhere on Columbia Street. There's very little we can do. In fact, we might even run into this, we haven't talked about this, we might even have to take an addition down if we were to continue with this project because of that covenant. There's really no great options for us. My sense is that this site, this project, as it's been described here tonight, is the most flexible that we've seen in 2 years of discussion. Because it's the most flexible, it has the greatest probability of success. I am nervous as all get out about the, what do we call it? It's a
Magnitude?
order of magnitude budget. I would love to have a better sense of where the numbers are, but I appreciate that we're not at that point. To get to that point, we have to go through the Stage 2 application development and see where we are. That's what the motion does. It suggests to the school committee that that's the next leap we have to take. It's not perfect.
To add to that, I think that what we're doing as a committee is voting to decide whether or not to advise the school committee that we should move with the current plan. It doesn't mean that during that time, because we're not going to be submitting that Stage 2 for a while, there's still going to be work done, and changes can still potentially happen, and they're going to be looking hopefully for the best outcome. And I apologize because it feels like my microphone's not on, but hopefully it is. So that's what I'd like to add to some of the concerns that I agree with our town manager on. And I'm sure there's plenty of people in our community that have the same concerns. I've always felt that, my concern with the high school, and I think I said it from day one, was we're going to be renovating an old building. And, we might have an idea of what it's going to cost, but when you do renovations, it's always going to potentially change, and usually it costs more. With new construction, you have a really good idea generally what it's going to cost and more control. But I do feel that this particular option gives the flexibility and the best possible outcome based off of what we feel that we can afford as a town. Granted, I wish money wasn't an object, because if money wasn't an object, I'd be like, from the beginning, let's do a new high school. Because, like Mr. Palazetti said, we would be able to have better efficiencies when it comes to maintenance, to heating, to so many different things that it makes sense. But based off of what we've talked about over time, and whatever we're going to increase taxes by, it's going to affect the entire town. And there are people that can't afford to maintain their own homes right now that are going to have to pay more in taxes. And you have to really think about the children in our school. They're our future, and we want to make sure they have the best absolute facilities and the best potential educational outcome. But at the same time, we have an entire town of folks to consider when we decide that we're going to spend X number of dollars. And, if we could figure out a way where it would be advantageous for us to do a brand new high school, we would do it. But I think we've looked at all the options. And one of the options that we looked at a long time ago was to knock down Curtis Corner and build a new high school here. And that moving to a different site as well was going to be very expensive. I don't remember the actual number, Dave, but do you recall what that number was?
Is that your 5-minute bell?
It might be.
Because I'd like to hear from some other people on the building committee. All we ever hear from is you and the town manager. I'd like to hear some other people.
Listen, Doral, I always give everyone the opportunity, and from the very beginning, I am very open to all ideas, and everyone at this table has an equal vote and an equal voice. So that being said, I always go over and give you as much time as you need to speak. I get it.
We never hear from anybody else.
It's their prerogative, I guess, but I always ask if people want to say something, and I'm not going to force anyone to say something if they don't want to.
I have a question, Brian.
Yeah, sure.
When is the Stage 2 application going to be resubmitted? Do you know what that date is?
Well, that's the deadline to submit, right? So it could be submitted earlier, but
What was that email that, JC, you sent out? Was a memo from RIDE today? It said that the deadline was, yes. Right, but it had to be submitted by February 20th?
No, Mark, you're right.
Okay.
And the letter, I had that in my mind when I used that date as well. The letter referenced two submission dates, the September date for consideration this fiscal year, or this calendar year, and then there is a spring submission for next year should we decide not to submit in September.
Are there any other comments or questions regarding the motion? So if you'd like to make that motion again, I'd appreciate it.
The motion. The motion made by Rob Zarnetsky was to recommend to the school committee to move ahead with the Stage 2 application for the Curtis Corner property to be reused as the high school, and it was seconded by Deb Kelso.
All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Will there be a deadline on that, just in case, similar to the last time when it was rejected and had to be resubmitted? I just don't want to wait till September and it gets rejected and then we will have a problem. Is there going to be a specific date that?
Is your microphone? Oh, you need a microphone, sorry.
My question is whether or not there'll be a specific date that the Stage 2 will be submitted by RGB in case there are any feedback from the state for reclarification or resubmission of some of the items, so we don't, we'll be going up against a very tight deadline once again. So I didn't know what your plan was for the submission of the Stage 2 prior to the September deadline.
Wayne, if I could, I think that's the next, we have to sit down as a team and do that scoping, but very quickly, we want to sit with RIDE, with Christine and her team, so we can they've been apprised of kind of the work that we've been doing, but we haven't had a formal sit-down. So I think sitting down and talking through, we've talked about an earlier submittal than September so that this can be in front of them ahead of time. It'll actually help, I think, in a lot of ways because it'll get it in ahead of that crush of additional applications that are going to be coming in. I don't think we can peg a date tonight, though. I think the team needs to establish what we think that schedule will be and then report that back to the building committee.
All right, thank you.
I apologize to report out the votes, unless, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think I heard 11 yeas and 2 nays. Yeah, right. Okay, great. So that motion passes. Next up, did someone say something? Next up on the agenda is item number 10, invoice payments and contracts. I think Mr. Leska would like to speak regarding that.
Tom Lesker again from Bentley Downs. I just wanted to address this as a process improvement for our team going forward. We should really flow chart how our contracts are issued, how our payments are issued. We really, and especially embarking on an $85 million job, you want to be out there and say, we're going to pay you in 10 days because that'll drive the market, that'll drive the prices down, and you'll have a very quick, happy job. Because if you keep, this person has it, we have to just flow chart it. It's an easy process, and I think we can make this process go very smoothly and address it in the contracts, because when you put in a contract, we're going to pay you in 15 days, you're going to get much better pricing. And doing $200, $300 million projects in the past, I've really seen a big benefit and big discounts. In fact, Brown University, we put in the contract 10 days, 15 days, we pay in 5 days. And we got 2% discounts on some of the bids. So it's just going forward, let's sit down, make a better process for everybody. So I want to address.
Thank you.
On that question, I'd also like to make sure that we don't expect any product, any work done without a contract, because that's where we've gotten into some issues before, right? So I don't want to see anyone go unpaid for work done because there wasn't a contract in place. So I would, like somehow the school committee to make sure before they authorize any work that the contract is complete.
I agree with that.
Absolutely. While I'm up here, I did want to address one thing that Rob brought up about repurposing Columbia Street School. I've seen it done many times, very efficiently. The town has to buy into that process, because whether you're converting it to apartments, condos, or whatever, so the process, I've seen it work great. In fact, Pawtucket Memorial is being repurposed into another hospital facility. So I wouldn't discount it. Keep moving forward, Rob. Get the RFIs out there and get the interest from developers, because it can work. But the reason why I'm saying the town has to be part of it, because I saw it fail in North Kingston, Wickford Elementary. that we were doing a very, very good program, and the town wasn't fully engaged in it, so.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Sure, go ahead.
Tom, just real quick, what's your experience with time and the lag for getting something like that put together?
As far as the, putting an RFP out there, or? No, it's fine. I mean, the risk that you have, and I think Deb brought it up, is you have to make it clear that depends on the bond passing. So those contingency things, I think you should put it out now. The quicker the better, especially now that the market's really good, people are energetic. Who knows what's going to happen in 3 years, so you kind of get a jump on it and put those contingency plans in place where if the bond fails, hopefully not, because I think this is a great process, and then it goes away, but I would do it right away, Rob.
Thank you. Anything else from anyone else at the table regarding invoice and payments? Mary Ann, how are we, we're up to date on payments for the festival project, or? Oh, Zach, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, the money goes back and forth.
Yep. Yes, they are. Yeah, we're waiting on that.
Okay.
And RGB is going to be made whole.
What is the holdup with that? I'm sorry. With, because you, okay. Sure, go ahead.
There are definitely process improvements that can be made to procurement on the municipal side and the school side. Doing a project that involves both municipal and school requires us to really focus on some process improvement because we both have to do that together. It's not uncommon. This is a small municipality. You know, we have a procurement clerk, one in our shop, and there's a procurement clerk, one in the school shop. We need to figure out how to maximize our folks. That's really what it is.
Thank you. All right, item number 11 is scheduling of future meetings. Our next meeting will be a daytime meeting based off of our every other month plan that we have currently.
Mr. Chairman, when does the school committee meet next to vote on this question?
We actually have a budget work session scheduled for January 28th, but they will be, we had kind of penciled in thinking that a possible vote would happen prior to that work session. So Tuesday.
I'd just like to schedule the next meeting once we have the decision of the school committee in place. It seems fruitless to go forward without their decision.
So I'm also sort of trying to figure out, we've got a lot of activity around this project right now. We are looking to have a planning board meeting, and again, we haven't done schedule yet. I haven't coordinated with the schools, but we'd like to have that discussion in the Columbia Street neighborhood on the 8th of February. So if we sort of think about it's a Saturday, yes. That's correct, yeah. The CIP for this town council is next Monday. Really, that week between that meeting and the 8th is probably a good week for the school committee to meet, and it would be after the vote by the school committee. So something in the week of, what is that?
It's also school vacation.
Yeah. Something the week of the 30th through the 3rd would be good, but if that's school vacation, that's not great.
But no, school vacation, I think, is it the 16th through the 12th? Does anyone know when school vacation?
I don't.
Yeah. Wait, 14th to the 18th. Oh, okay. So it's not, okay. I wasn't aware of that. I think I could read your lips there for a second.
So, again, boy. Seems perfect.
Of what?
But did you want to meet after you meet with the community?
No, I think this is fine. The 5th would be great, yeah.
I'll have to check. I don't have connectivity, so I can check to see if the chambers are open. I know the first Wednesday can often be the TRC meeting, but they don't always meet, so I can look. I'll get back to you guys.
We could always go to the school administration building if that's an option, if town hall is.
It's always an option, so, well, not always, but it's always an option in general. So why don't we tentatively schedule it, if we could look at meeting space, and JC, if you could send an email out to the committee with the confirmation.
Amy can let you know tomorrow, then I'll get an email out to the committee.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn? Second? All those in favor? Aye. All right, meeting's adjourned at 9:28.